Hi class, do you know what this is? Well, in this case it is actually a tape dispenser, but it is modeling on something called cassette tape. Yeah, I know it's a joke. I know that most of you know what this is, of course, and it's such a staple of the 1980s. The reason why I was showing it is because at the time when cassette tapes were all the rage, and before the CDs, before we had this high-tech equipment that we use nowadays for our video pleasure, before streaming, can you believe it was time before streaming? CNN and the likes were really powerful networks, primarily through their foreign reporting, through the coverage of foreign events. And that was a time when foreign correspondents, so people who were reporting from abroad, were still very influential in terms of their numbers, in terms of the prestige, in terms of training they needed to gain in order to become basically eligible to report foreign news from a foreign land. Well, foreign reporting and foreign correspondents are still considered an elite in the media, but nowadays it is a very, very, very small elite, and their role has changed very dramatically. I attach a few clips from a movie called Foreign Correspondent by Alfred Hitchcock, which shows this idealized picture of the reporter who is saving damsels in distress and spying and being chased and running around and getting in all kinds of adventures, and somehow finding the time to actually write a story for the newspaper. Uh, not the case anymore. The correspondent job can be very dangerous, can be extremely demanding. But as I said, the numbers of people who are doing it has been slashed dramatically in the last years. When I came to work for the Dallas Morning News in 1996, I was surprised by the fact that they had only one foreign correspondent covering the entire continent of Europe. They had bureau in Berlin, and this person, a really nice, talented, very well prepared journalist, was responsible for doing stories from all over Europe. So just imagine a continent with 300 plus million people, um, thousands of possible interesting stories, very influential on the world stage, and only one person covering it for the newspaper. Well, guess what? Since then, Dallas Morning News has cut even this coverage. I believe right now they have only one bureau in Mexico City, one foreign bureau. Why? Well, first of all, it is expensive to maintain foreign bureaus. I talked to the chief of the foreign news desk at the LA Times a few years ago, and he told me that it cost them about $1 million per year to maintain a foreign bureau, and they had about 17 of them at the time, including in Baghdad, including in Beijing, including in Brussels, including in London, including in Mexico City, and many other places around the world. But they have been downsizing as well. In fact, there are only a few American newspapers and major news organizations who still maintain permanent foreign bureaus. They usually would have a bureau in a place like Beijing. They usually would have a bureau in a place like London. They might have a bureau in Baghdad, especially and definitely when the war in Iraq was going on. I think most of those bureaus have been closed by now. They might have a bureau in New Delhi in India, which would be responsible for the coverage of anything from Pakistan to Sri Lanka to Afghanistan. They might have a bureau in Tokyo, but the number of these bureaus and foreign correspondents has fallen dramatically since the end of the Cold War. Has the public been less interested in foreign news? No, I don't think so. It is just the model of coverage has been shifting. More and more, these news organizations are relying either on local stringers, on people who are local to the particular country they're covering, and they do stories and they send them on a freelance basis to the news organization, or they rely on basically something called parachute journalism, where they would send a correspondent just to cover an event. For instance, if there is a terrorist act, such as the ones in Paris in 2015 or Brussels, they would send a reporter, they would send a crew to cover the aftermath, to cover the events, to make interviews. But after that, they'll be gone out of the country, even major countries such as France, if you believe it. So that's the model that has been much leaner, much more efficient, but also in many ways deficient, because a foreign correspondent is a person who should be living ideally in the country, who should be knowledgeable about the language, about the culture, about the politics, about what's going on in the country, as much as a reporter who is covering a certain beat or certain events in the United States. You'd expect them to be knowledgeable about this particular beat, about which events actually constitute news and which events are not so important, because you cannot cover everything. I am myself sort of a foreign correspondent, because in the past 10 plus years I have been writing a weekly column for a variety of Bulgarian publications covering topics in the United States, anything from the elections to unfortunately shootings, to all kinds of controversies and issues and topics and events happening in this country. And covering a foreign country for another country means that you have to translate it, you have to interpret it. It goes both ways. Foreigners have to interpret the United States for their compatriots. So I have to explain the United States to, say, Bulgarians, which is not always easy, because they might not necessarily have the same understanding and same background knowledge that American audience would have. But it also goes the other way around. Think about how you learn about something from Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria or France, or a range of other countries. How many of you have actually traveled to these countries? How many of you are knowledgeable about the culture, about the traditions, about the history of these countries? How many of you know the language of these countries? So this is a really important and very, very difficult job that the foreign correspondents have, is to relate the events in a language that the local audience would understand. And unfortunately, as I said, the numbers of these foreign correspondents have been dwindling. Very few major media outlets in the United States maintain permanent bureaus, and I think this affects negatively the quality of the news coverage from abroad. Because I do not believe that the audience has less appetite for foreign news. One of the reasons why you are taking this class, for instance, is I think you're interested in what's going on abroad. I think you want to learn about the world, and foreign correspondents and people who are bringing you the world through the media are helping you understand what you cannot achieve by traveling, by being in person at the numerous events that happen all around the world. So I hope you appreciate the hard work and the preparation that goes into this type of coverage, the danger that's associated with it sometimes, especially when we're talking about war coverage, and you see some documentaries that are just heartbreaking about how reporters covering war expose themselves to danger and get killed. And again, as I said, appreciate what has been brought to you by lots of these courageous men and women, well prepared, truly the elite of the journalistic profession.